The President of the United States stood in the White House briefing room yesterday and said something that stopped the entire world cold. Every bridge in Iran will be decimated by 12 o'clock tomorrow night. Every power plant in Iran will be out of business, burning, exploding, never to be used again. He said it would happen in 4 hours. 4 hours to erase the infrastructure of a nation of 90 million people. This is not a movie. This is not a simulation. This happened today. And if you think you understand what is really going on here, you don't. Not yet. Stay with this video, because what you are about to hear is not what the headlines are telling you. And before we go further, if this kind of ground-level breakdown is what you come here for, hit that subscribe button right now. More is coming, and you do not want to miss it. Let's start with exactly what Trump said, because the words matter, every single one of them. Standing at the White House podium on April 6th, Trump did not speak in vague diplomatic language. He did not hint or suggest. He declared, "We have a plan, because of the power of our military, where every bridge in Iran will be decimated by 12 o'clock tomorrow night, where every power plant in Iran will be out of business, burning, exploding, and never to be used again." Then he added the timeline. 4 hours. Complete demolition in 4 hours. He wasn't done. The next morning, April 7th, Trump escalated again. He posted on social media that a whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again, if Iran missed his 8 p.m. Eastern deadline. Read that again. A whole civilization will die tonight. These are the words of the sitting President of the United States, directed at a country of 90 million people. 90 million people who have nothing to do with the decisions being made in Tehran. This is the moment we are in right now. Now understand what those words actually mean on the ground. Because the mainstream coverage keeps showing you diplomats and deadlines. They are not showing you what losing power and water actually looks like for 90 million people. Iran has 82 functioning power plants. They supply electricity to hospitals, to water pumping stations, to traffic systems, to refrigeration for food and medicine. The moment those plants go dark, water stops flowing within hours. Hospitals switch to backup generators, and those generators run out of fuel within days. Think about that, not as a strategy, as a reality. Iran's largest desalination plants process millions of cubic meters of water per day. Trump had already threatened to blow up every single one of them weeks earlier. He added desalination plants to his target list on March 30th. No power plants, no water treatment, no bridges. That is not a military campaign. Legal experts across multiple countries have called it exactly what it is: collective punishment. And collective punishment of civilian populations is explicitly prohibited under international law. It is a war crime by definition. When a reporter asked Trump directly if he was concerned about committing a war crime, he said, quote, "No, I'm not worried about it." He then argued that the real war crime is allowing Iran to have a nuclear weapon. That exchange happened, publicly, on camera, at the White House. Here is what was happening on the streets of Tehran while Trump was speaking. Ordinary people were doing ordinary, desperate things, charging every phone they owned, filling bathtubs and water drums, buying bread and flour by the sack, stocking up on bottled water which had already doubled in price. One resident told reporters he and his wife could survive without power and water for about a week. After that, they said, "We'll definitely run into problems." That is the dignified, quiet understatement of someone preparing for catastrophe. Iranians had already been living under relentless pressure since February 28th, when joint US and Israeli strikes began. They had already gone through airstrikes, already lived through one 12-day war last June, already endured an internet blackout so severe it became the longest nationwide shutdown ever recorded in history. And now they were standing on balconies, watching the sun go down, wondering if their city would have electricity when it rose again. Musicians were standing in front of power plants in protest. Retired electrical workers were volunteering to return to work to repair damage. Emergency services released alternative phone numbers in case the main systems went offline. These are not the actions of a regime preparing for war. These are the actions of a civilian population bracing for darkness. Now here is the number that should make every person watching this stop and think. The Strait of Hormuz carries approximately 20% of the entire global oil supply. 1/5 of all the oil that moves on planet Earth passes through a waterway 33 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. Iran has been blocking it, or severely limiting traffic, since late February. The effect was immediate. Oil prices hit $115 a barrel on Tuesday. Fuel prices across Europe, Asia, and the United States began climbing. Supply chains that depend on Gulf shipping began rerouting through longer, more expensive paths. This single waterway is the reason for everything happening right now. Iran knows this. Trump knows this. Every energy trader on the planet knows this. The entire strategic logic of Trump's ultimatum was simple: open the Strait of Hormuz or lose your entire civilian infrastructure. Trump called it the single most important moment in, quote, the long and and complex history of the world. Iran's position was equally straightforward. The strait will open when the damage caused by the war is compensated, through a new legal framework, with transit fee revenue. In other words, Iran was not simply going to hand back its only remaining piece of leverage without guarantees. This was not a negotiation between equals. This was a standoff between a country with the world's most powerful military and a country with control of the world's most important shipping choke point. Here is where it gets even more complicated, and here is what almost nobody is telling you. Iran did not just sit quietly while the deadline approached. It struck back. Iranian drones hit Kuwait's oil sector complex directly, struck the Kuwait Petroleum Corporation headquarters, hit operational facilities, started fires across multiple sites. Iran also knocked out power generation units and hit water desalination plants in Kuwait. Then it hit a telecom building and a port in the UAE. This was a message. If Trump destroys Iranian infrastructure, Iran will destroy infrastructure across the entire Gulf region. Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the UAE, Bahrain, every country in the region understands that the next phase of this conflict does not stay inside Iranian borders. Iran's military made it explicit. If you commit aggression and strike civilian facilities, our responses will be more forceful. And Iran's Revolutionary Guard expanded its target list publicly, putting Gulf Arab countries on notice. This is how a regional war becomes a global economic catastrophe. The international response to all of this has been a mix of alarm and paralysis. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres warned the United States that attacks on civilian infrastructure violate international law. He said it publicly and directly. The United Kingdom told Washington it will not allow U.S. forces to use British bases for any operations targeting civilian infrastructure. That is not a small statement from a historically close ally. Pope Leo XIV called for a rejection of the war, saying it is unjust, continuing to escalate, and not resolving anything. Pakistan's Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif publicly appealed to both sides, posting directly to Trump, Iran's president, the foreign minister, Marco Rubio, and J.D. Vance. He asked Iran to open the strait for 2 weeks as a goodwill gesture. He asked all parties for a ceasefire. Inside the United States, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries called on Congress to end what he described as a reckless war of choice. Multiple Democratic lawmakers called for invoking the 25th Amendment. Even Marjorie Taylor Greene, a longtime Trump ally who left Congress in January, called for his removal. An Arizona congresswoman introduced articles of impeachment against Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, citing the bombing of a girls' school in Iran and the deliberate targeting of civilian infrastructure. The coalition of critics is not just foreign, it is growing inside Washington itself. And then came the deadline, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, April 7th. Less than 2 hours before that deadline expired, a ceasefire deal was reached. Iran agreed to reopen the Strait of Hormuz for safe passage for a period of 2 weeks, with coordination through Iran's armed forces. The United States agreed to suspend military strikes against Iranian power plants and energy infrastructure for the same period. Trump, who had spent 48 hours telling the world that a civilization would die tonight, announced a 2-week suspension of the strikes. The clock stopped, for now. But here's what you need to understand about that ceasefire. It is not a peace deal. It is a pause. A 2-week window during which both sides are supposed to negotiate a permanent end to the conflict. There is no agreement on Iran's nuclear program. There is no agreement on sanctions. There is no agreement on reparations for war damage. There is no agreement on what happens in Lebanon. Netanyahu's government made clear within hours that the ceasefire does not apply to Lebanon, where Israeli operations continue. 2 weeks is not a solution. 2 weeks is a countdown. Here is what the next 2 weeks actually look like. Iran has taken serious damage. Its military has been significantly degraded over 5 weeks of U.S. and Israeli strikes. But it has not lost its ability to close the strait. That leverage remains intact until a permanent deal is signed. The U.S. has conducted more than 600 strikes on Iranian targets in just 4 days. American military assets in the region are stretched. 2 American airmen were shot down over Iranian territory. A rescue mission had to be conducted deep inside Iran. The U.S. burned 2 of its own transport planes to prevent them from falling into Iranian hands. This war has already cost both sides more than the public has been told. Israel's interception rates against Iranian ballistic missiles have dropped from 90% to somewhere between 65 and 85%, depending on the source. Iran has now used cluster munitions over Tel Aviv. Submunitions are scattered across residential neighborhoods. Unexploded bomblets are sitting in gardens, under cars, in playgrounds right now. And the economic damage is global. Oil at $115 a barrel. Shipping routes disrupted. Supply chains fractured. Countries from Europe to Asia absorbing fuel costs that were unimaginable 5 weeks ago. All of this is the cost of 5 weeks. And the 2-week ceasefire has not resolved a single underlying issue. Here is what you need to hold on to after this video ends. Trump said every bridge in Iran would be gone by midnight, every power plant burning, a civilization dead, never to return. He said it would take 4 hours. It did not happen. A ceasefire intervened at the last possible moment. But the threat was real. The plan was real. The military had the orders. The timeline was set. 90 million civilians had already started filling water drums and charging their phones because they believed it would happen. The only thing that stopped it was a last-minute diplomatic intervention brokered through Pakistan, with the Pope weighing in, the UN warning of war crimes, Britain withdrawing base access, and the entire international community watching a clock tick down. That is a fragile way to prevent a catastrophe of that scale. The deadline was April 7th at 8 p.m. The next deadline is 2 weeks from now. The same weapons are still pointed at the same targets. The same leverage is still in place over the same waterway. The same leaders are still in power on both sides. And the ceasefire clock is already running. 28 Israeli civilians dead, thousands hospitalized, a journalist kidnapped and released, 2 American airmen shot down, an F-15 lost in Iranian territory, Gulf states hit, oil at record levels, and a 2-week window to solve what 5 weeks of war could not. The world did not step back from the edge last night. It just agreed to pause there for 14 more days. Watch this space, because what happens in those 14 days will determine what the next chapter of this conflict looks like, and that chapter is already being written.